we're going to do another one here roughly, and we're going to do one about half in there. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, yeah, because I'm going to open these out and then to get my flare in the meanwhile after I've done this section here. So basically what we have to do, this section, remember we did this section here, this at the neck is got to be exactly the same. So what we can do is, you can do two things. You can work it like how we did that, or you can use this and you can shape it, right? So you've got to take off the seams though and place that on at the armhole. Take the seam off like that, and take the seam off the center front, which you've got here on the front. You see that? You've got a seam here, and you lay that right on top with the seam off at the neck, and that's off. And then all you do is you reshape that onto that side, because it has to be mirrored. So because you've done that already, you mark that off, and you can even mark it with put your seam allowance on. And can you see that's already matching there with the seam allowance on there? So you mark that on along there like that. So we've got that. So you've got that shape there, and then we can just continue marking out the rest of it here, and then we put the seam allowance on, and we're going to mark it down to here like that, because we don't want, we can take the seam allowance off and then we can add it on after. So I'm going to mark the seam allowance off. I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to reshape it like that. Take the seam allowance off, and the seam allowance are off here, and the seam allowance off around the neck. And then I'm going to remark it to get the same pleats at the top like I've got on that side. I need that to be mirrored along there. So once I've got that, I'm going to mark down to the line that I want, like that. I'm just going to put a mark, and I'm going to, first of all, before I slash and open that side, I'm going to make sure that I've got my tucks at the top the same along there, and then put my seam allowance on. So what I do is I'm going to make sure that the seam is off, like I said, along there. The seam is off around there, along that side there. And then all I do is I'm going to mark the same shape that I've got on here on this side. So I'm going to follow that shape where I've cut it, and I'm going to put my notches in where I've got it along there. I'm going to take that off there, and then I can put my seam on. So the first notch I've got is that one. Let me just put them in while we've got them out. If I can find the notches, they're here. Let's just put the notches in so that we can see exactly what we're doing. That's the first one, second one, and then fourth one. So once you've got those, we make sure we've got them on this side as well, with the seam off here along there. We can put them in here. So that's one here, one there, one there, one there. So we get exactly the same repeat on that side, on this side. Okay, so all we're doing is transferring that shape onto that shape. After we've done that, we can put that away, and then we can also add our seam allowance on. But let's not do that until we've actually finished. I can draw this line in because it's a straight line down to there, along there. This has got no seam allowance on at the moment. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to slash up on these lines here, and then I'm going to open out so I'm going to go like that. This depends on how full you want your skirt to be when you open out. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to go in here like that, and I'm going to go along these points here. So I don't want them to fall off, so I'm just going to go above there, and I'm going to come this side for this one, not all the way because I don't want them to fall. Then I go back on that mark that I've made, and I've placed that on there. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to open, I'm going to close that a bit because I want it to be open, so that line, that piece stays straight, which is my grain line. And I'm going to open these bits out here like that. I'm closing, there's an overlap of 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch, depends on how wide you want to open them. So the more you close it, the more it opens up. So can we see that? The more we're closing it, the more we're opening. So let's just make sure that we can see what we're doing there. Make sure, can you see they're opening out, and we want them to be evenly spaced. We don't want this side to have more than this side, so they have to be evenly spaced out. So that is how we do it. And the way we're doing it, we're overlapping it at that section there, about 3/8 of an inch. If you want to do it, if you want to open more, then you overlap more, but I just want to do mine that much. That's full enough. And the same thing on this side. You don't want to go too mad from that line. You just overlap it so that it's not too full. So I'm overlapping it about 1/2 an inch on there, or 3/8 or 1/4 even, depends on how full you want that to be. So once I've got that and it's laying down flat like that onto that line, make sure, you've got to make sure that these lines are lining up, because that's your center front here up to that point. So make sure that that is straight. So you've got to put a weight on it. You put your weight on, or you put some sellotape or prick stick to hold it down. So once that's held down and you open out to that point, and you open out to that point, so you get your spacing in there, then you can begin to mark out the rest of the shape. So I'm going to put a little weight on there, and I'm going to start with this side. So I'm just going to put a little mark there that I know that's the bottom, and you just mark at the bottom of each piece that you've marked, you've opened out. So just along there and up there, so it's all flat along there, and you know that that is. So what we don't worry about what's happening, because we're going to get a good run along there with your curve. So that's slightly shaped there, that's slightly shaped there. So once we've got that, we can now move this draft away to add our seam allowance and to connect our lines. So I hope you can follow that. If you're not following that, you can, as I said, you can always send me a message and we can go back through it with you. So I'm going to take that off now, because that's my draft. Never throw that away. So once we got that on, all I'm going to do from that point here, I'm just going to connect up where it flutes out there, and I'm just going to connect where it flutes out here to that point at the bottom. So can you see that? That's your skirt shape beginning to take the shape that we want. So on this section here, these marks that we made, all we do is just connect them, connect them, connect them like that. And then you can use your curve to get a nice curve. So now that is the shape that you got. And the thing is, we haven't put our grain line on. So this is why I said we don't never throw the draft away. So what I'm going to do is to connect my grain line back on my pattern piece. So this is my grain line here, the center always on there, and then